As a Christian working woman, you have many roles, from your responsibility with family and friends to community and work. How do you connect all that you do with all that you are and still have your faith shine through? It's a challenge, but you are up to it. The She Works for Him podcast is the gathering place to empower Christian working women to live out their calling at work by connecting them to God, resources, and each other through powerful faith stories from other working sisters in Christ. Welcome to She Works for Him.
You've tuned in to She Works for Him, where we connect Christian working women to God, resources, and one another. And we are your hosts today, Martha Brangenberg and Nadia Dixon. I just want to remind you that you can find out more about She Works for Him by going to sheworksforhim.com or following us on Facebook, Instagram, or our YouTube channel, where you can actually watch the interviews. And because, I think so much, we do a lot of facial expression. I know we talk with our hands. It just gives us that visual that sometimes we need. So you can go there and subscribe and get the notifications when we have a new video out there.
Thank you, Martha. As Christian working women, we are often faced with the tension of finding balance and how we're to function between the workplace, our marriage, our parenting if we have children, and our church. And this can cause us to wonder if we're even enough or if we're even making a kingdom impact. How can we lead confidently as the woman God designed us to be and do the work that God assigned? Our guest today has a passion for unleashing Christian women to live and lead authentically in their workplaces, whether it's in the marketplace, a nonprofit, or the home. Today, we are going to Orange County, California to speak with Helen Mitchell. Helen's leadership in the business world, the local church, and academia gives her the background to facilitate building bridges between the church and the marketplace. She is influencing the next generation of business leaders and women in the marketplace as a writer, speaker, and a coach and consultant. She's the director of the Talbot Center for Faith Work and Economics, and she's the professor at the Crowell School of Business at Biola University. Helen, welcome to She Works for Him.
Well, thank you, Nadia. It's a pleasure to be with you, and Martha, thank you for having me on your show today. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, Helen, you and I have had a lot of conversations in the past, and I'm so thrilled to have this time to share you with our listeners. But one of the conversations I don't remember having with you is why you became a follower of Jesus.
Well, that's always the starting point, isn't it? Great question. I wish I don't have one of those stories that says I lived the life and Jesus intersected, but Jesus did intersect into my life actually at a very young age. And I was about 8 years old, and we were going to a church, I believe it was a Nazarene church at the time, and I later found out that I was scholarshiped or gifted to go to this church camp. And I honestly don't remember much about the church camp other than this. Somehow I found myself kind of meandering. I tend to stay by myself when I was a kid. I found myself wandering out a little bit into the wilderness area and remember sitting down on a stump. And as I look back now, I know it was the Holy Spirit and his presence that came upon me. And at the age of 8, I just started crying and looking and going, oh my gosh, if God could do this with creation, what could he do with a human being? And it was at that moment and just, in what way I could as an 8-year-old, I gave my life to Christ. And he met me out there in the wilderness. And I think about that quite often. And I also think that also was an early learning that the Lord had given to me, that whoever had paid for me to scholarship to come to that place and to find Christ, they will take a share of every good thing I do for all eternity. So talk about an eternal investment. I walked away from Christ a little bit, couldn't really find my groove in my discipleship. And then he met me very powerfully a number of years ago, which led me into this place I am today.
Wow, what an incredible story. I love that you met him early on. I know you've experienced a lot of adversity, and we'll get into that. But you did eventually get into a career. You started your business career with AT&T, and you became the vice president very quickly, soon to run a $500 million branch by the time you were 35. When did you realize that your work mattered to God?
Yeah, that's a great question. It actually wasn't until after I lost my job in the executive field, and then the Lord took me into this wilderness journey that I've been on since November 20th of 2003. And at that time, he has begun to converge and to bring this idea of faith and work together. Now, first of all, you have to stop and remember that when I was an executive so many years ago, this was absolutely not even on the radar, right? We have not had podcasts like you. We've not had books, conferences. We're not talking about it in churches. And then even when the Lord took me out in November 20th of 2003, he began to seed my mind and my heart with this idea of faith at work. I had no idea what this meant, but that began my journey. But again, even at that time, almost over 18 years ago, even at that time, there was only just a smidge more out on the market in terms of blogs and support, and few people were kicking the can and making a little bit noise, but it really didn't take traction. And so I've really been on this faith at work journey to just really uncover this and to go into deeper depths. And the Lord just takes me deeper and deeper into this. And it's so exciting. And so I'm on the back end. I look back and I'm like, man, as an executive, I think I did a great job, but man, I sure wish I knew the things we're talking about here today.
And that's one of the powerful things, Helen, about this conversation is finding that place where we don't live with regret for what we didn't know. But now that we know, now that our eyes are open and the blind spots have been, revealed, like, okay, Lord, how can we help others? We always if we learn something, that's one of the core values for She Works for Him is to connect people to those resources, to each other, and to God. And when we do that, we're helping them to kind of make up for some of the stuff that we wish we'd have known earlier so that they can be further on in their journey. So as you talk about this connection of faith and work, how is it that you became the architect and the visionary for the workplace ministry at Saddleback Church in Lake Forest, California?
So again, this is one of those kind of meandering, there's not a direct line, right? So certainly God was in the midst of that. And just the place I never thought I would be. But real quick, let me take you back to a little event in Princeton, New Jersey, in a chapel on the campus of Princeton, New Jersey. And it was in the early 90s. I think it was like 1992 and 93. It was my first corporate executive promotion. I moved from Arizona to New Jersey. And my father-in-law and my husband at the time, we were sitting in this beautiful old church. I love architecture. And I'm sitting in this wood pew, just sitting there. And of course, I'm, 20-something years old, not discipled in my faith and my work. And I had the triangle upside down, and God was to serve me and my selfish desires. And I really didn't understand what it meant to be a Christian, much less a Christian woman or Christian in the marketplace. I'm sitting there just in the awe of this beauty and this architecture. And I said, Lord, thank you for what you've done. And thank you for bringing me here meaning this promotion, right? And I will follow you anywhere I will follow you. And I heard, this is one of the first times I heard the Lord's voice so clear. It was like as if he was sitting behind me. I turned around like, was there somebody there? There was nobody there for pews. And he said, no matter where it leads. And I had to stop and I had to think about that. Why did I say I would follow the Lord? And did I really mean what I said? So I said, absolutely, yes, I will follow you where it leads. And I knew that I was making a commitment at that time. But I always knew, what exactly did all that mean? I felt like there was another shoe to drop. There was something I always kind of felt like I was looking over my shoulder, like what was that all about? And I also look back and I go, well, what happened when I was 15 years old when I approached my pastor? And I said, and I had no context of I want to go into ministry, I want to be a pastor like youth would have today. Again, it was another God and Holy Spirit moment. I told him I wanted to be a pastor, and I was actually licensed before the church and so forth. And that was a prophetic act. So that too was always sitting behind my shoulder like, well, what was that shoe? Or what was that all about? I love business. What is this all about? And so that was that. So we fast forward it. I lose my executive job November 20th, 2003. And I heard the Lord say to me, I'm calling in my loan. I'm calling in on that promise you made. Mm-hmm. And it was that moment that I started this wilderness journey. He started to integrate that pastoral and those business callings. And so leading up to where you're at, it really connects. So I'm in, trying to figure out where am I supposed to go with life. So we'd been attending Saddleback Church. My kids were very young. So I went through all the classes, 101, 201, 301, one right after another, but couldn't take the class 401 until the following October. We talk about God's times are perfect. Mm-hmm. And it was at that time, Pastor Rick and Saddleback Church was announcing the peace plan and what that was. And a pastor by the name of Mike Constance was just coming on board. And he stands up in front of this whole room, and I'm sitting there, and he says, He says, in your packet there, pull out a little piece of information. You don't have to sign the little document, but if you want to, make sure you know what you're signing. And it says, I agree to follow the Lord no matter where it leads or what it costs. And the room was spinning, just like you have it took me right back to that pew in Princeton, New Jersey. This time it was whatever it was going to cost. And I didn't understand what that was going to be for the years yet to come. So I thought, well, that's what got me into this place already, was the radical surrender. So I went ahead and signed it. And as I was driving out on Saddleback Parkway, just unemployed, trying to figure out my single household, young kids, trying to figure out what am I going to do, unemployed executive, the Lord said to me, get an appointment with Mike Constance. I'm like, no way. What? And so as we fast forward the matter, I ended up having an appointment with Mike Constance in the fall, that fall. And come to find out, he, with his experience, he had some previous faith at work experience. And then that was the end of it. And it just sat dormant until one day I get an email that says, Pastor Steve Gladen, who oversees our small groups, got your name and information from Pastor Mike Constance. He wants to put small groups in the workplace, and he heard that you have a passion and an interest for faith at work. And that was the early part of 2015. And so as a volunteer, I stepped into that, not knowing what that would mean. And it just bloomed from there. And that was another place of surrender. And when I stepped off the pastoral staff as a licensed pastor, we had done a number of things, including having over 300 small groups meeting in workplaces across Southern California to form people, men and women, to be like Christ in the workplace, to work on character. You work on this first before we can work on this.
So good.
Wow. Helen, that's so great. Hearing how God took you on that journey, and now you, like you said, looking back, you can recognize the steps that he was preparing for you. That's a lesson we can all be learning, because it's going to be a different story for each one of us. Yeah. But having that attitude of surrender and acknowledging God's hand in all of it makes such a difference. When we come back, we're going to hear more from Helen Mitchell. You're listening to She Works for Him with your co-hosts, Nadia Dixon and Martha Brangenberg. We'll be right back.
Did you know that God has a calling on your life? It's true. He's called you to bring Jesus to the world. For some, that may look like a pulpit or a foreign mission field, but for most of us, it looks like a construction site, a cubicle, a hospital, or a classroom. Wherever it is that you work, live, volunteer, and invest, that is your mission field. To learn more about integrating your faith into your work and retirement, check out our books, I Work for Him, She Works for Him, and I Retire for Him, by going to iworkforhim.com/bookstore.
Welcome back to She Works for Him podcast with your co-hosts, Martha Brangenberg and me, Nadia Dixon. And we're here today in Southern California with our guest, Helen Mitchell.
So Helen, for more than almost 9 years now, you have been a single working mom. And how did that come about? And maybe tell us something about your journey that you've learned that we can learn from you that might be helpful.
Yeah, I'd have to say that has been the hardest part of my life journey thus far. And I became a single mom when my girls were 10 and 14, when my husband passed away at the age of 50 due to a rare form of lymphoma. And so there is so much that God showed me, worked in me, worked through me in that period of time. So much that I had seen, learned about even years later, dealing with anger and resentment and bitterness and lots of things. But the things that I would say, and you know what, that is truly just the hardest job I've ever done. I think I would say the first thing for women who are in a similar place for whatever reason, I would say, first of all, that God will not fail you, no matter what it looks like. I would hold on to that Isaiah passage that said he leads the one who has the lambs. And so that would be the first thing that I would say. The second thing that really just was like an iron burning into my heart is, I knew it before, but just even more so. And I would say, whether you're a single mom or not, and children are not an inconvenience. Children are not an afterthought. Now, how we as women go about and execute and live out and balance and operationally handle that balance between faith, our work and our home, children are absolutely a priority and a gift from God. And somehow we don't do that. And then the last thing that I would say is that that as a single mom, there's this tension, there's this balance. It's kind of like weights. I only have so much time that I can spend working. Either I spend more time providing, it's provision versus parenting. Mm-hmm. And if I'm there for my children to be wholly present, to teach, to guide, ask questions, to keep them out of trouble, all of that. And if my employer is demanding and not helpful, then that is struggling and pulling on that parental thing. So, but if I'm more present, I'm less providing. And then money becomes an issue. And there's only so much to go around. And so I would just say, if you're in a similar spot, give yourself a break because you're doing the best you can. Yeah. And if you know someone who is a single mom, come alongside them. Don't think they got it all nailed, you know. So those are just some key learnings that I would just offer up.
Such a great word, especially, you know, for those that may not be in that situation. Let's come alongside. Let's gird each other up and walk the journey together. So, Helen, one of the things this podcast, we talk about integrating our faith in our work, and you've been a leader in that space for a couple of decades at least. What do you think is missing from the conversation, and what do you think needs to be added?
Yeah, so there is. I'm so excited that we have podcasts like this, and that the conversation is increasing and happening in more places. But fundamentally, like the foundational, what is faith? What is our faith in the workplace for? And what is work? And I think that we can add to that here briefly. I'll throw out a couple of ideas that I think we have collectively an incomplete view of work or theology of work. In that, I would offer to you from my definition from my friend Jim Woodward, a convene chair in Dallas, Texas. He defines work as anything that provides value for self or others. So if a mother's changing a baby's diaper, she is ministering to that child. Ministry is not a job title. It is not a job definition. It's not an industry. It's not an occupation. It's a way of life for a follower of Jesus Christ. So we've got this incomplete view of work, or we have this hierarchy of work. But the biggest thing that I would say, two things. First of which is that work in and of itself is good, that's what it's for, that we as an extension of Jesus, who is above all powers and principalities, we are seated in the heavenly places. We've been given to go and take off from him what he did in 1 John 3:8 to destroy the works of the devil in the earth. That we are to walk out into the earth, regardless of the job that we have, our job title, to govern the heavenly places as well into the earthly realm. And we're missing that. And that faith at work is not it's not only about evangelizing our coworkers or funding the local church. The very essence of the work that we do and the decisions that we make. And why did Jesus then say, let me teach you how to pray? And he said to pray on earth as it is in heaven. So we are to agree with him in heaven for his will, pull down what he wants to have happen and execute it into the earth, either through prayer, decree a thing, it shall be done. I'm on my little elliptical in the garage. I'm just praying into things into the world and into the country and coming into agreement with him so that he can handle things into the supernatural realm. And then also as we walk it out practically in the work that we do. And so we can't lose sight of that.
Yeah, that is a great message that is missing or not heard by enough. You know, I think that's the thing. There's just so many people that just still have not heard that truth. So thanks for sharing that.
And helping us to flesh it out too, because it's one thing to understand it theoretically, and it's another thing to function in it and walk in it. And I think the more we understand, the more time we spend with God, he shows us how to function and how to practically execute his agenda. So as we're in the corporate world, the church world, you come from all these spaces and now academia. Most of these places are male dominant still. What are some of the challenges that you've faced in your work, and maybe what you sense other Christian working women may grapple with in these types of places when it's that type of an atmosphere, when it's more male dominated?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I have not had too many situations where I could say, I specifically was discriminated against or whatever, specifically because I was a woman. But what I could tell you, what I've learned from that is sometimes we as women, we use that as an excuse. Well, I'm not at the seat of the table of influence because I'm a woman. Well, I think before we jump to that conclusion, we first need to stop and look and reflect upon ourselves and say, how am I showing up? Do they want me at the table? Do I have the competence and the knowledge, or do I have the character to hold the calling? Do I make myself safe? Am I catty? Am I gossipy? Do I get along with other people? Am I difficult to work with? Many times you have multiple women who work together and they have difficulty. So I would just say we would just kind of put that as one piece on the shelf. Yeah. But one of the things I think I have, the biggest challenge that I see, that quite frankly, I'm still working on, is kind of this idea of homographic reproduction. The first Harvard tenured professor years ago came up with that term, which is people tend to reproduce people who look like themselves, whether we do it intentionally or not. And so whether this good old boy network happens intentionally or unintentionally, it happens. And as women, you get left out and you're like, how come the male boss is only going to lunch with the guys? When I was an executive with AT&T, we had this saying we called, oh, he's a 42 long. And that was his in scene. He's a 42. He looked the part, right? He was dumber than a box of rocks. And, as I look back, I'll be real honest. I did not handle the unsanctified, immature self, young person, did not handle that very well. And I made my feelings known.
But I can bet a lot of us can. I mean, when you said that, it's like right away that gave me the visual, and I'm guilty as well. So I think we've probably all been there. But I love that you just said, how are we showing up? Because we do need to put that on ourselves. This isn't, this is how I show up is my responsibility, my relationship with the Lord, and how that comes out. So there is so much more here that we have to get to talk about with you, Helen Mitchell. And when we come back, I'm going to dig in just a little bit more before we end this discussion today. You're listening to She Works for Him with your co-hosts, Martha Brangenberg and Nadia Dixon. We'll be right back.
As women, we like to share our special finds with others. That new little shop we just discovered, or a favorite brand that is having a sale. Well, I have a special find for you. The Awaken Podcast Network is a collection of podcasts gathered onto a digital platform with you in mind. No more searching and wondering if the content is relevant. The work has already been done. Awaken Podcast Network even has smaller collections of podcasts focused on specific topics, including a collection called She Works for Him, dedicated to content for Christian working women. So go ahead, unlock God's purpose for your work, and check out awakenpodcastnetwork.com.
You're listening to She Works for Him. Welcome back with your co-host, Martha Brangenberg. I'm Nadia Dixon, and we're here today with our special guest, Helen Mitchell. Helen, you've really unpacked a lot already, and it's so good. I need to re-listen to this podcast because I really need to process some of the things that we're talking about. But you talked about how women show up, and you have an incredible opportunity to do that from your platform as a professor, as a speaker, and author. How are you preparing the next generation of emerging leaders and women that are rising up in the workplace to navigate these challenges and not have to start over?
Yeah, great. Thank you. And through those platforms that you just identified, and with my ethics students, my undergraduate ethics students, both male and female, I can even engage all of them into these type of gender conversations and what does this look like. But with that platform and how I am communicating in terms of forming and shaping and sharing what God has imparted to me, I would leave with this one last thing. I would leave with this. Ladies, you are not an afterthought. You are not a mistake. You are not second class. In Genesis 2:18, well, first of all, in Genesis 1, God made man and woman together in his image, and together we complement and make the image of God. Genesis 2:18, when Adam walked the earth with the Lord and everything was perfect, he said, it is not good for man to be alone, because it's that humanity that we need to connect with each other. And God says, I will make a helper or a helpmate for him. Ladies, I was always bothered. I'll be real honest. I was always bothered by that word helper. I never felt like that fit me. I wasn't the little lady who went and got the coffee. But what I found out is in the Hebrew, helper means etzar, and it's used 21 times in the Old Testament. And it means the helper, the one who helps. It's used even in Psalm 121. It says, where do I look from? Where do I get my help? My etzar, it's the Lord. So ladies, you are not superior. You are not inferior to men. You are created to be equal, to co-labor in the earth with men, in the household, in the community, and in the world. You are not an afterthought. You are dearly beloved. And so if we start with that in our eyes and our identity, start with Jesus, regardless of our job title, we follow him, we honor him, we walk close to him. I promise you, he will break down those barriers. He will open those doors if we have the character and the competency to hold it and to walk with him in close communion and abide under the shadow of his wings, because he's done it for me and he'll do it for you.
You know, your students are so blessed to have you. I could just sit here and listen to you all day, Helen. God has given you, obviously you have studied the scripture that God has given us, and you have made it a part of your life. And thank you for sharing it with us just a little bit. But I'm sitting here thinking, can I sign up for a class that I could be one of your students? You know, and I just thank you for this great impartation to all of the women to better understand who they are in Christ.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with both of you.
Helen, I'm just so thrilled that you're here and we're sharing you with our listeners. You have so much more to offer, and we'll be including links to your website. I know you have a lot of resources there. You can find Helen Mitchell on Right Now Media. I use a lot of her videos in the master's program for women as we're raising up women. Is there any last encouragement that you would give our listeners today regarding their authenticity in the workplace?
Yeah, thank you. I would. So the question is, how now do I begin to walk this out in the fullness of the calling that God has for you as a woman? I've got a secret link on my website if you'd like to go to kind of unpack some of these. If you go to helenmitchell.org/women, you'll see a sheet, 10 things that help us understand how to walk this out to be God's woman in a man's world. And I've got a video right there that talks you through that. So that's my gift to you, and may you be blessed. God bless you.
Thank you
wonderful.
so much.
So now we get to be your student in a little bit of a way, hear a little bit more of you. Thanks again, Helen Mitchell, for being our guest. You've been listening to She Works for Him with your hosts, Martha Brangenberg and Nadia Dixon. We're Christian working women, helping other Christian working women to live out their calling at work as she works for Him.
As Christian women, we have many roles. From daughter, sister, friend, wife, and mother to analyst, accountant, executive, or educator, is it possible to balance our roles at work and home in a way that honors God? The answer is yes, and our new book, She Works for Him, will help show you how. Written to celebrate, encourage, and equip women in the workforce, She Works for Him discusses the diverse experiences of today's Christian working woman. Pick up a copy by going to iworkforhim.com/bookstore. You've been listening to the She Works for Him podcast with your hosts, Catherine Gates, Nadia Dixon, and Martha Brangenberg. Please like us on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube under She Works for Him. And to access any of the resources we mentioned on today's show, see the show notes at sheworksforhim.com. That's sheworks4him.com. This podcast was created to empower you to live out your calling at work so the world knows she works for Him.